I saw a car crash as a child. My dad stopped the car to go help. He made me stay in the car, but I saw one body on the ground that started to gain a puddle of blood around it, and another body hanging out of a window of one of the cars involved in the accident. Blood, glass, and car chunks were everywhere. Horns were honking. I heard a lot of screaming. My dad came walking back to the car shortly after he got out. I asked what happened. He said there was nothing he could do. He pulled into a parking lot and waited for the cops to come. I remember being impressed by how fast the firefighters cleaned everything up. You would think seeing the bodies would stick with me, but what stuck with me was the pale, dead look on my dad when he came back to me. Sometimes your best intentions can't do anything, and I could tell it got to him. I saw a 5-year-old girl fall about 30 feet from a chairlift while skiing. When she landed, I was about 15 feet away. She landed on her stomach. I called ski patrol immediately, but the time it took them to get there felt like an eternity. It was probably not more than 5 minutes. I had no medical training other than the very basic do not move the injured person, since her face was directly in the snow. I took my jacket off, and I held her neck still and had a nearby person slide my jacket under her face. It was shortly after Christmas, so I tried to distract her by asking her what she got from Santa, and I sang her favorite Christmas song. I kept holding her neck still until ski patrol took over and sent her in the ambulance. Later, I found out that although she had some bad bruising, she walked out of the ER later that day. My mother giving my brother CPR on the beach after he broke his neck and almost drowned. He was in the water for about 4 minutes, then watching the helicopter take him away not knowing if he was dead or alive. He defied the odds and went on to live another 36 productive years as a quadriplegic. I was with him when he died a few years ago. Damn, we had some good times. When I was 17, I still lived at my mom's house. We were in a middle-class neighborhood, so it wasn't necessarily a bad area for the most part. I was taking out the garbage one night as the sun had just gone down. I walked the first garbage can out, and these 2 men were arguing across the street. I walked back and got the second one. When I turned around, one of the men lifted a gun and shot the other in the head point blank. The man with the gun stared directly at me, then turned and fled. I was surprisingly calm about it until I was on the phone to the police. Then suddenly I started freaking out and panicking. As far as I know, they never caught the guy. Second plane hit the World Trade Center, out my 35th floor office window, about half a mile away. The first one happened behind me, and I guess I didn't hear it, but then someone called me, and I was looking out the window at the smoke and the papers floating everywhere. I still thought it was some small plane accident, and I couldn't see the hole because it was on the other side. I was wondering if it was caught on video and picturing what the crash would look like in my head when the second one hit right in front of me, on the side facing me. It slid in like a coin into a slot, and after a moment, a ball of flame shot out in various directions, and a moment after that, my window shook. It looked just like I was picturing the first one in my head at that moment, and my mental gears turned for a full 10 seconds, wondering how my eyes just showed me what I was picturing. It wasn't until someone ran into my office asking what happened, and I heard myself tell them that I realized it. I walked down 35 flights, walked miles home to Brooklyn, watched the second one fall on TV, then found my wife and toddler daughter at a gym class and immersed myself in my daughter's world where this didn't happen. We pulled up beside a captain in the army who was covered in blood. He was shaking and asking if we would help him because everyone in the Humvee were dead except him. They were working with the Iraqi army and hit an IED while doing a movement. We explained to him we specifically came out there to help him, and he just wouldn't stop thanking us. It was obvious he was in complete and utter shock. He was the only survivor in that truck. It was Christmas Day. I worked at a gas station when I was 18. One night, at the end of my shift, the graveyard guy just didn't show up. I called my sister to see if she would hang out with me until I could get a hold of someone. At about 4 a.m., an ambulance slowed down right in front of the station. As it came to a stop at the light, the back doors opened up and a guy jumped out. One paramedic hopped out of the back, chasing after him. The guy ran right up to the station, looking terrified. He turned to the left to run again, and we noticed that his head was missing a big chunk in the back, blood all down him. Medic continued to pursue him through the parking lot next door. We called 911 and explained the situation, and dispatch responded, "Yeah, right." About 20 minutes later, police arrived to take a statement from us. The guy was high and injured, trying to get away. I don't know if they ever caught up with him again. I skidded on ice near an interstate toll station in 1989. I spun 180 degrees and stalled, looking the wrong way up at the interstate into the headlights of the 18-wheeler behind me. He stopped in time. Waking up totally covered in blood, I was walking to class and got hit by a car. I am not sure what happened in the moments leading up to it, but I woke up in the middle of the road cradling my head. I distinctly remember lifting my head and looking at my blood-covered arm, thinking, I'll deal with this later, and putting my arm back under my head and going back to sleep. I turned out pretty okay, but I genuinely think the accident made me dumber. My grades slipped hard after the event. I once tossed my little brother into the pool, and his head came within an inch of the concrete edge. I knew as soon as he left my grip that I put too much force into it, and time slowed down as he drifted through the air. With the angle he was falling, the speed he was thrown, and the height he reached at the peak of his trajectory, I knew if his head connected, brain damage would be the best-case scenario. It was over in half a second real time, and everyone carried on playing around. I had to sit down and take a breath. I love my siblings. A trailer load of pigs that the tailgate opened while traveling down a road. Those poor piggies just tumbling out the back of this trailer, breaking legs, skidding along the road. They didn't scream. The silence made it much more disturbing. They just sat there, legs splayed, road rash oozing blood, and they looked like they were in shock. A suicide jumper was pretty unnerving. He fell from several stories up and landed on the curb. His body was rigid for a moment, then just kind of melted around the shape of the curb. Then blood. Unsettling. Hi, time for a little break from all of that. Those poor pigs. That last one really doesn't look right at all if you picture it in your head. Whew. Well, the point is, stuff happens, and when it does, we should try our best to recover, even if it's difficult. And even if we are not directly involved, the mental stress stays with us. Know when to ask for help and know the emergency numbers in your area. Well, on to the rest of the stories. As a young lad, I saw a man on a ninja-style bike wreck into a telephone pole at over 100 miles per hour. I was the first person, and I went to him, and he was crying, and his jaw was hanging off, and all of his teeth were missing. I went for help and called 911, but when I went back to where he was laying, he was dead. Came from seeing a movie at the mall with my 2 teenage sons. We had arrived separately and parked our cars in different sections of the lot. After leaving the movie, I was driving up a ramp and saw peripherally my son's car with the front end smashed in and smoke coming from the front. I quickly U-turned, and as I drove towards them, I could see my older son, the driver, 17 years old, standing outside of the passenger door with my younger son, his brother 14 years old, in his arms. The passenger airbag had deployed, so the 14-year-old had a nasty scrape on his face from it, but thankfully they were both okay. I hope I never feel fear like that again, ever. Worked as a healthcare security officer in a rather large, locked psychiatric ward. One day, I was leaving dispatch and happened to catch on our old black and white monitor a man sitting in the middle of the main floor. Something struck me as wrong. Suddenly, I saw a black puddle beginning to form under the man. I go running up to the unit, and there sat a man in a puddle of blood. I called for backup, but he stood up and ran to me. I fought this guy for about 5 minutes, both of us covered in blood. His eyes were dead, like a shark's. Turns out he had sat on the floor and ripped out the stitches the ER had put in after a suicide attempt. A 12-year-old's beating heart and breathing lungs. He blew his chest wall out with a 20-gauge shotgun from a distance of 8 feet. He propped the gun against a fence post to cross the fence. The gun fell and went off. He was hunting. Catching a methed-out young woman rummaging through the tools in my dad's garage. The face she gave me when she realized a larger male had confronted her in a confined space was one of pure terror, and she was ready to claw my eyes out to survive what she most likely perceived as a threat. When she turned to run out of the garage, my police officer dad caught her by the arm and held her down until the police arrived. Watching her fight, beg and plead that we won't rape her or kidnap her was pretty heartbreaking when we had the best intentions in mind of getting professionals to handle her drug-infused meltdown. The struggle was strong enough that we decided we should handcuff her to keep her from hurting herself or us. Came to find out later she was on the run and being chased by police because she thought she was being chased and in danger of being kidnapped inside of a hotel. We were her worst nightmare in her mind, and it sure as hell looked like it. When I was younger, I kicked a ball over the fence of my dad's friend's house, and naturally I stepped on the fence and poked my head over to see how far it had gone. I saw a man a decent distance away in the backyard, so I called out, asking if he could pass my ball back over. But he wasn't responding, so I asked my sister if I was seeing it right. She looked and thought it was a scarecrow. I went to tell my dad and his friend, and they looked at it and called out, but still nothing. They jumped the fence to check it out, and it turned out I was calling out to a man who had hung himself to pass my ball back over. A few cops came, and that's about all there is to the story. It wasn't really scary, just creepy. I was pretty young, but it didn't really get to me or anything. I do remember it pretty decently, though. I once found a young man, 16 to 18 years old, who was extremely physically and mentally disabled, who had been living his entire life in what was basically a shed, lying on his back in his own filth. The parents didn't know what else to do with him. This was not in the developed world, obviously. A hand grenade flying through the passenger side window of my Humvee. I was already on edge to begin with. That was definitely the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. Second most terrifying thing was the aftermath of said grenade. I lost a hand, broke both legs, missing part of my foot. Guess what I didn't lose? Consciousness. After seeing my hand missing and my feet and legs pretty much mangled, I definitely struggled to stay with it. I remember how either my brain or body or something made me feel like dying was okay. It was kind of a dreamy, peaceful feeling, and that scared me. Well, that's it for the stories for this session. Goodness, some of them were pretty disturbing, weren't they? Okay, I hope to see you guys again in another video. Bye!